Hi lovely booktubers, welcome to my channel, Raina Read Stuff. I'm Debs. Um, I'm here in the book shack. I hope you're interested in history because this video is my wrap up of quarter two of Historathon 2024. Historathon is the creation of Vin at Revenant Reads. There's a whole host of co-hosts. I'm very proud to be one of them. For those who don't know, we split the year into quarters and we read different time periods, non-fiction history on anything at all, within the different time periods for each quarter. So the first quarter was prehistory to 500 CE. Quarter two, which we've just finished, was 500 CE to 1500 CE. So, without further ado, let's have a look at what I picked up for that. I'm going to start with the biggest book, only because it makes more space on the table. The History of Britain in Maps. And this was by Philip Parker. And it included fascinating maps and explanations of them. Maps like this one. That's the Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy. And it actually says here that no maps of Britain survived from the period between the 5th and the 11th centuries. This is a map by Matthew Paris. Matthew Paris was a 13th century Benedictine monk, and he was based in St Albans. Now, not all of these maps fit into the time period. This does. This is an Anglo-Saxon map of the world. A lot of these maps are early, and we have the first topographical maps. We have another one here by Matthew Paris, who seemed to be doing, in fact, there's a lot by Matthew Paris, who seem to be doing a lot of work. The later the maps get, the more detailed they get, and we go right through to weather maps. A map of, this is a garden city plan, Hampstead. We have the German go to raid map. I found this book fascinating. I chose it for this particular time period because quite a few of the maps were from that time period. Now, let's put that on the floor. To start with for Q2, I concentrated on Vikings. And I did a couple of buddy reads. This one, The Children of Ash and Elm, A History of the Vikings by Neil Price. This was a buddy read with John David, Stephanie Cohen, and Claire Shepherd. I found it very accessible. It wasn't a difficult read. It concentrated, Neil Price is an archaeologist, so it concentrated on archaeological sources. It said Neil Price was going to cast an entirely new light on Vikings. I don't think that's necessarily true, but it was certainly a very interesting book and a very enlightening book. It talked about things like social networks in the Viking era, um, slaves, sheep farmers, the first attempt at monarchy, um, just how far the Vikings travelled and the trade routes that they set up. It was very well done, and I enjoyed it very much. Next, in my Viking exploration, another buddy read, Valkyrie. This is by Johanna Fridriksdottir, and it's subtitled The Women of the Viking World. This I read again with Stephanie Cohen and also with Vin. And this was different to Neil Price's book in that it predominantly looked for sources within the sagas. And that was a very interesting take. The chapters followed ages of women. So we started with infancy and childhood and went on through the teens, um, married life and divorce in adulthood, pregnancy, childhood, and motherhood, widows, because there were a fair few of them. The Vikings went off, waged war. Um, many of them didn't come back. And then old age as well. At first, I found this a bit strange, taking your lead from sagas that for many centuries had an oral tradition, and so therefore ain't necessarily so. But actually, by the end of it, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I love the sagas anyway. So this was a good read. Finally, this was a tiny, tiny book. Tiny book. This is by Irving Finkel, and it tells the story of the Lewis Chessmen. Now, the Lewis Chessmen were found on the Isle of Lewis, which is a Scottish island, and there were, I can't remember how many of them there were. I'm sure it'll tell me. They were found by a farmer, um, and they were underground for. It's estimated the pieces were originating in Norway in about 1150, and they were found in 1831. Some pieces were sold to a private collector. Others went to the Museum of Scotland. There were 77, I think. And this just tells you how they were found, what happened to them, how the farmer sold some of them, and that they were never repatriated. Some now are in the Scottish Museum, some are in the British Museum. There was an exhibition some years back where they actually got them all together again. So that was my Viking foray. A couple more buddy reads. The Word Horde by Hana Videen. I read this with John David. It was a difficult book to buddy read because there's not really a lot you can discuss about it. It's a bit like Your Guide to Middle English, like they do, French phrase books or German phrase books. So it was funny. Um, I enjoyed it, but a lot of it was lists and lists of words like in a dictionary. Um, I think it's one I will dip back into on a regular basis. It sort of blends linguistics with a phrase book. Um, and some of the phrases it's chosen to use are really quite fun. But John and I had difficulty in discussing it because of the format of it. I read this with Alex from Alex Unabridged. We had no difficulty in discussing it. This was Femina by Janina Ramirez. Janina Ramirez is, well, she started off as an art historian, I believe, but she's also a broadcaster and an author. And this was incredibly readable. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Its subhead is A New History of the Middle Ages through the women written out of it. We have people like Hildegard. Um, we have we have lots of different women, from religious women to scientists, um, through spies and outlaws, diplomats, entrepreneurs. It was fascinating. It was a fascinating read, a very entertaining read. Um, I'd certainly recommend it. Now, I also read a couple of eBooks. Another buddy read with Vin and Stephanie Cohen, Lost Christianities. Now, we read this for a different event, but it works for this. It talks about, sorry, this is by Bart the Ehrman. It talks about what isn't in the Bible. So the scriptures and the books that were left out, and it talks about how they were left out and why they were left out. And a lot of these leaving outs happened during the time period for Historathon. It's interesting because I'd never really thought about what was included and what wasn't included and why. Um, and there were whole different sects of Christianity that just disappeared because what the very specifics of what they believed was deemed to be wrong. Um, I've never read anything quite like that. It has made me, who is not religious, quite interested in finding out more about religion. Oh, we haven't left the Vikings at all. Now, I don't know whether you can count this as a history book, but I'm going to. The Saga of the Volsungs was, and the Saga of Rathna Lothbrok were the choices this year for Sagalong. And the reason I'm including it here is because I read the Valkyrie's book. And whereas it is perfectly obvious with the sagas that they have been passed down through generations, they weren't written down until many centuries after the events were meant to have occurred. there is an essence that you can find there of factual information. So, as Johanna, Karin, Fridriksdottir did with Valkyrie, if you think about them carefully, you can extract some social history. You can extract some essence of how society and politics were at the time. And for that reason, I'm including it. Finally, this is one that I also read for the Summer of Sport, which is still happening. Fox tossing, octopus wrestling, and other forgotten sports. The most dangerous and bizarre sports in history. And this is by Edward Brook Hitching. And again, it didn't perfectly fit into the time period for that quarter because it spanned more than that. But many of these sometimes ridiculous sports had their origins within that time period. In fact, some of them even had their origins and died out within that time period. Some of these were ridiculous. Some of them were hideous. There's a reason a lot of them died out, and that's because they weren't overly pleasant to animals. Fox tossing, for example, appeared to be people in a fenced off area holding edges of sheets or other pieces of material, and a whole load of foxes are let out into said arena. And the idea is, as they run over the material you're holding on the ground, you throw them up in the air. Really? Yeah, some of them were just bizarre. And the book was quite fun, though. And again, it's a piece of social history. It's not the sort of thing you're probably going to study for a degree in history. But it has historical content. Well, it's all historical content of a different type. I do like to vary my reading. That's actually it for quarter two. I've got 10 books there, which is I probably should have done more. I'll try to do better this quarter. I've got a huge reading list for this quarter. I've already read one and started another, neither of which were on the list that I put together. If you want to see my pile of possibilities minus the 2 books that I am or have read, then I'll pop a link below. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I'm hoping you're reading wonderful stuff. This is a great period of history. Let me know if you're taking part in Historathon, and let me know what you plan to read. Thank you very much for popping by, and I will speak to you soon. Bye for now.